Well, I had met Ed Teller at Los Alamos one day. We had a brief meeting and a talk. I had shortly thereafter moved to Las Vegas and basically left the scientific community to do other work. Sometime later I decided to re-enter and send applications out to several other national labs, and also went to Ed Teller, and he gave me a call, and he said he might have something that I'd be interested in, and suggested that I go for an interview. Shortly thereafter, someone from EG&G called and told me to come down for an interview there. They made it very clear that EG&G had nothing to do with it. They were just using the building as a place to do the interview. After a short time, they said I was basically overqualified for the position, but they may have something else in the future. And I don't remember how much time lapsed after that, but shortly thereafter, they asked me to come down for another interview, and they said this was involving, I don't remember their exact wording, but they led me to believe it was a field propulsion system, and of course I thought it was something that, in secret, that we were working on. Later, only did I find out that it was a back engineering program dealing with alien craft. I flew out of Las Vegas McCarran Airport, and I flew to Groom Lake in a 737 aircraft. We land at Groom Lake, and there's a bus there that drives about 15 miles south, approximately. I'm really not sure exactly how far, down to a smaller dry lake bed known as Papoose Lake. And right up against the side of the mountain is the S4 installation.
And what happened to you first when you entered it? How did they receive you?
It was very military-like. It was certainly not a scientific atmosphere. Very high security. Everywhere you walked, you had to have an escort, an armed escort, even into the bathroom. All doors lock and open with your badge, and it was a very oppressive atmosphere.
How many times did you spend on this atmosphere before you saw the craft for the first time?
I believe I was only there 2 or 3 days, probably 2 days before I saw the craft.
Time, how they are stored, what your impression was, and your feelings when you saw it?
Well, my feelings, it was very I should step back a minute and say that when I first saw the craft the first time, it was walking into the hangar, and my impression was, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. This is just a secret military aircraft we're working on, and that's the end of that. It was actually the second time when I saw the craft, when I got to enter it and look over it, and I finally realized what was going on, that this is an alien craft. And of course this was after I read the briefings, and that was a totally different feeling. That was not a feeling of excitement. It was almost an ominous feeling, that a feeling as if you shouldn't even be there. It's very difficult to describe.
How did it look like?
It looked like, if anyone's familiar with Billy Meyer's sightings, very astonishingly similar to that craft. It was a very sleek, thin-looking, flying saucer-shaped craft. Kind of hard to describe without drawing it, but kind of a typical flying saucer shape.
Did you see just one type or different types?
There were 9 total. I only got to essentially work, back engineer, or analyze one of the craft, but there was a separate hangar for each of the crafts, and each one was essentially different in its visual appearance.
Did anybody tell you where the U.S. Navy intelligence got the craft from?
No, not at all. That's a lot of people have speculated about it, that they were either shot down or they crashed, but the craft seemed undamaged, so I doubt either of those would be correct.
Can you describe the inside of an alien craft?
It's very plain. It's all one solid color, a grayish pewter color, the same color as the outside of the craft. There are no sharp corners anywhere. Every device in the craft, the seat, the amplifier housings, everything has a rounded corner on it, almost as if it was all fashioned out of wax and then slightly melted, so everything curved, even where the ceiling meets the floor on the end. Everything has a curve to it. Very, very plain, very wide open, very impractical use of space. And there are 3 levels. The lower level houses the amplifiers themselves that swing, the 3 of them. The center level is where you enter the craft, where the seats and the amplifiers are, and the top level is a small area, and I did not have access to that, so I don't know what's up there.
Do you think they're alien craft or US constructed?
Absolutely alien craft, there's no question about it.
Why?
Well, first of all, the scope of the project was to back engineer it. If they were United States craft, we wouldn't be going backward trying to find out how they were built if we had built them. Second of all, the size of the equipment inside, the size of the seats, the materials that were in use, completely alien to us, pardon the pun, and the fuel, element 115, essentially non-existent. All these factors together, and of course the briefing information stating that they were alien craft.
Could anybody tell you how the propulsion functioned?
Well, that was part of my job, was to back engineer that and find out exactly how that operated. And they had made some progress, but I really don't know how long the craft was there being analyzed, if it was 1 year or 10 years before I got there, but it seems like only a modest amount of progress had been made. The propulsion system is really an amazing setup. There's 2 parts: there's gravity amplifiers and the reactor that provides the power. The reactor itself is a total annihilation reactor fueled by antimatter. Total annihilation is essentially the most efficient nuclear reaction that takes place of the 3, fission, fusion, and annihilation. It uses a super heavy element, element 115, as it would appear on the periodic chart. None has yet been synthesized on Earth. It's my opinion that this occurs naturally in certain star systems. This element is bombarded in an extremely small accelerator. The element under bombardment undergoes spontaneous fission and produces antimatter particles. These are interacted with a gaseous matter target, and by means of a 100% efficient thermoelectric device is converted into electricity. Now, 100% efficient any electric device is essentially impossible. The first law of thermodynamics says that's basically impossible. There has to be waste heat and things of that sort, but there's none detected in this system. It's another amazing form of technology. This tremendous amount of power the system generates operates the amplifiers, and also as a byproduct of the 115 undergoing this bombardment, it produces very interesting phenomena, a gravity A wave, as it's known to be called. This gravity A wave it travels in almost the same way microwaves travel. This is essentially applied to the gravity amplifiers, and by means of the electric current also provided by the reactor, it's amplified and focused. The amplified signal is shifted slightly out of phase, and by virtue of that they can repel or attract a gravitational body. The craft can take off on one gravity amplifier. There are 3 in this particular craft. When it's using just one amplifier, essentially pushing away from the Earth, it's known as Omicron configuration. For space travel, the craft will rotate up on its side, face the 3 gravity amplifiers at the target, they'll focus down on a single point some tremendous distance away, and the amplifier and the associated and the associated reactor will be run up to full power, and they essentially pull the fabric of space, distort space and time toward the craft, so they can traverse a tremendous amount of distance in virtually no time at all. They're not traveling in a linear fashion. They're essentially bending space and space, the fabric of space essentially, and gravity and time are all interlaced. When you start distorting gravity, you distort time and space along with it. And these aren't theories. We've known these for a while. We just have no way of controlling them. But apparently, the civilization has found out how.
Did you people manage to fly one?
They've done several test flights in it now, not out of the atmosphere. These are short, controlled, low-altitude flights. Essentially, they have a prized possession here, so they're not going to risk taking this to a point where they could potentially lose it as, at the gravitational pull of the Earth, or going too high. But I witnessed several tests outside the compound, and also one, probably about 100 feet away from the craft.
How did the craft behave in the flight?
Very, very quietly. It lifted off. It made a slight hissing sound, a slight blue glow from the bottom, probably due to the extreme voltage that's present on the craft. After a short time, that disappeared as it rose and just gently glided, and later sat down. It was very uneventful, but almost totally silent.
Can you please describe the briefing documents and the information contained in it?
There were an extensive amount, 120 some odd briefing documents, all of them very short, and essentially what they were doing was just giving me an overview of the other aspects of the research being done on the craft, and the bulk of the information, all the technical information, was specifically dealing with the power and propulsion system, which is what I was supposed to be working on. But there were documents basically stating that these were aliens that possessed the craft. There were some autopsy reports that, not very in-depth. They had no reason to give me in-depth reports on that, but they did have pictures and, two pictures actually, of the alien carcass with the chest cut open and a single organ removed, and the organ itself was sectioned. It seemed to, from my non-medical viewpoint, it seemed that this one organ performed many functions instead of one. There were documents on metallurgical work being done on the craft, and really every aspect that separate groups were working on. And I'm sure they got a briefing on what my group was working on, a very abbreviated one, as I did on theirs.
And did you say where the aliens come from?
Yeah, it did mention the Zeta Reticuli system, and how that information was extracted from the craft, I don't know. Maybe there were star charts or something along those lines.
Did they contain any information about the history of mankind, the alien involvement in the history of mankind?
Not really. Nothing that said, well, this is the way things were. There was mention of alien intervention in the past. I mean, extremely long ago. Something along the lines of millions of years ago. For the information that I looked at, it seemed that, and there again, these are briefing documents, so I can't myself ascertain whether or not these are true. I can only assume it because the briefing documents I read that pertain to the propulsion system were true, because I dealt with that. But they did make reference to contact with the Earth over 10,000 years ago, also with genetic alterations that ended in a simian being, and all kinds of claims.
Did you ever meet an alien or some alien body?
Other than in pictures, no. I've mentioned several times that I'd walk through an area and looked in a small window and saw something small there, but I really can't say that was an alien body. A lot of people jump on that and say, yeah, you must have seen an alien, but there's just as much chance that they were trying to figure out the size difference and how the seats fit a body, and they had made up a small mannequin or something. I didn't see anything moving around alive. So I always say no, I have never seen a living alien.
Why do you think you were chosen for the job?
That's very difficult to say. I really don't know. I'm certainly not the most qualified as far as physics goes. So I really don't know. I approach things at a very different viewpoint. They might have been frustrated after a long time of walking down the same path and not getting anywhere, and they wanted someone essentially to come out of left field and approach it from a different angle with a different viewpoint, and I'm kind of known for that.
Why did you went public with the information?
When?
Why?
Why? That's, again, a complex question. It's not just one reason. There's several, stemming from many things. Harassment, to protect myself, the fact that this information being contained is also unfair, but there are many, many reasons.
After you went public, did they try to silence you in any way?
Oh, in every way. Yes, I was shot at while getting on the freeway here in Las Vegas. Friends were harassed and taken out of work that knew me. Many things happened.